Hey everyone, thanks for joining us, wherever you're joining us from, whatever time you are watching this at. I am here with Casey Hawkins. I am super excited to get into this session because it's one of those things that is just good to do. I don't know that there's anybody who would make an argument against getting that data right in HubSpot if you want to set things up for success. And maybe a thing that you've deprioritized, and maybe a thing that you are wondering what the best approach is. The case for getting it right and getting it right early when it comes to data is strong. Casey's going to walk us through her framework, some of her experience building the right data practice, the right data structure from day one. Casey, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Stuart. I'm very excited. I told you I've had this kind of obsession recently with new HubSpot users and what are some of the first things that we should be doing. And this is relevant whether your account is new to HubSpot or if you're new to HubSpot or if you think you're going to be doing stuff better. We all are learning stuff all the time. So I am really excited to be here and to start talking about some of the stuff I like to do when I first get into a portal. I don't even think I told you this, Stuart, before, but I actually launched my website yesterday. So I'm hoping to walk through some of the steps of setting up in my account so that this will be a dual-purposed webinar.
I love it. I love it. And I think that one thing that's really worth calling out here is that data can be boring, right? Setting stuff up from scratch can be kind of dull and monotonous, but the number of times you see a portal that's 6 months in, 6 years in, and there are things that you are trying to do in the business that you just can't do or are incredibly difficult to do reliably in a way that you have confidence in because the data isn't right from the start. So I think that I was just in a similar position to you a couple of weeks ago with a new portal, and being intentional about how you set things up makes a huge difference later on. To get sort of right into things, the first thing you have here is that there's sort of this hidden cost to messy. And like I sort of talked about it at a high level, but why does it cause so many HubSpot implementations to ultimately fail in serving the business the way that they would like their portal to work for them?
Tons of ways. I mean, with messy data, there's common issues. Duplicates is like one that comes up a lot and pretty frequently. If you don't have some data structures in place, you're more likely to have more duplicates. And it's even more importantly, it's going to be harder to find those duplicates, which came up recently with a client. Also, you're going to have missing data, which is harder to segment your audiences based on. Best case scenario is you have forms that people are coming to your website, filling out and giving you their own data, their own information. But we all know the longer the form, the less likely people are to enter any information at all. So I think it's important to set up some ways to enrich data when you don't want to ask people 100 questions on the first form submission that they send you.
There are definitely some things that you can point to that like this just needs to be here from the start because this is going to come up, even if it's not on day one when we have no data or limited data, it's going to come up at some point. Is that going to be more problematic and become a project that we have to devote time to instead of other things?
One of the things I want to talk about is standardizing location data with dropdowns. And I'm doing this currently for a client. I've done this a few times for clients. And when you don't set it up at the beginning, you have to backfill it all. And it's way harder to backfill it than to just have that set up. So these are all things like the longer you wait to do these, the harder it's going to get. So even if you've had your HubSpot, if you've been in HubSpot for, 6 days, 6 months, 6 years, the sooner you do a lot of this stuff, the better either way.
There's nothing worse than going to something that is not the optimal implementation and seeing that currently being used in 75,000 records, and that's a headache that you do not want. So let's get into the sort of framework that you laid out, the sort of 5 steps here. I'm going to walk through how you have each of those steps. Sounds like you're going to do this live, which I'm very excited for.
Let's do it. Like Egypt when you're watching this.
But the first thing that you mentioned, you sort of touched on this, is having a tool or a way to automatically populate missing information about records, right? Like you have records that could be created in a number of different ways, whether it's a manual add in a CRM interface, whether it's from a form, as you mentioned, whether it's from an import, whatever it is. And being able to sort of complete those records is important if you want to be able to do stuff with those downstream.
So there's a bunch of ways to enrich data. I mean, some of this is going to be manual through workflows. I mentioned the client that we were working through a bunch of duplicate records. And in that case, their problem was they didn't have websites for a lot of the companies. How we were able to help expedite the process of deduping was I used a workflow to copy the domain from the associated contact to that company. And then it was much easier for them to match the duplicate companies. They still had to go through and deduplicate the companies or use a tool or something. But they said it went from taking her 5 minutes per duplicate to like 30 seconds. She said, my client said she timed herself. It was like so much faster once we just had that little bit of extra information. The other tool that previously we were using was HubSpot Insights, which of course got sunset the 17th. It was sunset on March 17th. I don't know where I am. Why I was really excited to talk to you about this process is, of course, you started AccountScout, which is a free alternative to HubSpot Insights. And installing it is so easy. When I first installed it, I was like, this is the best thing ever, and immediately emailed like everyone I knew. So you go to AccountScout and you sign up.
Today it's still me.
Okay. We'll send you a link to install it. I am there now. And then I'm just going to choose this. I'm going to choose my account. And then I'm going to connect the app. And now it's installed in my portal. So now I'm going to be able to leverage those insights.
They moved it deep into settings.
You knew exactly where I was.
Yeah, I saw that the other day and I was like, that's interesting.
And so now this is just the free AccountScout account, but I can add the data to my company fields, correct?
Nope, you're all good. Yeah, so AccountScout works in two ways. As soon as you install the app, without you doing any configuration at all, AccountScout will automatically enrich any new records that you add. So if you add a new company, that will automatically get enriched. Just note there, it does take 60 to 90 seconds typically. So if you don't see it immediately, don't worry, it's working. The way that makes it more visible inside of company records is what you're looking at now. There's a card that lets you both see the data, but also click a button to enrich existing companies as well.
So let's create that card right now. Save and exit.
Yeah, you can also just drag it to the top. It's interesting when you add a card, it goes to the bottom and you have to go find it to move it around.
That makes more sense. All right, and then just for fun, let's go ahead and add a new company. Let's just add Apple. HubSpot, I'm doing the best I can. Great. And then, boom, there is the information about Apple right there from AccountScout. Just easy as that.
Yeah, and the properties will still update in the background. If you wanted it to update immediately, you could click the button, but either way, you'll see the type of information that gets pulled back.
So now we have our data from this center over on the property. So now I can use that in my HubSpot account to enrich from here. This is really important, especially from my perspective on location. So things like California, those are things we were getting from HubSpot Insights that a lot of companies were using in lead routing and things like that. And without having that enrichment in HubSpot, there's a huge gap moving forward. So I'm really thankful, Stuart, that you put this together.
Yeah, I think that's a good call out. That there's things that aren't necessarily hard to go find manually, but it's more work, right? You have to go find some of this information manually, and there's definitely for something like lead routing, you end up with a speed to lead type challenge if you have to wait for somebody to be available to go find it versus it being available immediately and then being able to use it in a workflow or in other HubSpot tools in a sort of more automated way.
Yeah, and I work with a lot of B2B companies. We don't often care actually where the contact is. We care where the company is. So it's a really great addition to really any portal, especially if you're B2B, but well, I guess pretty much, yeah. If you're B2B, this should be one of your first installs. It's pretty much a no-brainer, and it gives you some extra data that you just wouldn't have otherwise. So
Yeah, for sure.
very
Okay.
excited.
Number 2. So you have create a free domain list to filter out low quality leads.
One of my first lists in a HubSpot account, and I actually already have it in this one, this is shocking, is a free domain list. You don't have to use this. You don't have to do anything with this at any point in time, but I always find it to be a really great list to have on hand so I can filter those out as needed. And I have a spreadsheet that I use. A bunch of people have different lists like this. I personally put together this spreadsheet at some point. One of my first things in every portal is I just go in, create a new list of contacts, call this free domains. And then I filter contact properties, email domain, and then I take all of these is equal to any of, review and save. And now I'll be able to use that list in email exclusions if I want. Or if I'm lead scoring, I might give people less of a score if they have a free domain versus a business domain and things like that. It's just kind of nice to have and at least gives you some visibility into who's in your database. I also have a tab on here for what I call junk domains too. These are a bunch of domains that are like test.com or things like that probably I was testing a form and made those contacts, and then I can also use that to just clean up my database if I need to.
Yeah, I think it's a great call out on the visibility piece, especially if you are looking for things that rely on email domain, right? Like if you're looking at associations, if you're looking for the number of contacts that don't have an associated company, you can see which ones are, because they don't have a company domain. There's certainly places where you can use those. Same thing with like filtering out of reporting and like that kind of things. Like if you want to see like how many contacts are coming through this particular funnel that are business email, and we're able to, all the things that happen on the back end of that business email versus the free email, right? Having a company domain in your email means that you create a company that isn't Google, right? Or that isn't Outlook. And then you can enrich that company, and you can sort of, the whole waterfall flows from your data. So I like that one a lot.
Yeah.
Okay, what's next?
Yeah. Next, I'm going to go into my properties and I am going to create a state dropdown property. I mentioned this earlier in the recording, and this is one that I personally, people have paid me a lot of money to clean this up. So I'm going to do this very early in my portal so that I don't have that problem. This is a new portal. I'm not using this field. I would even argue to say, very few people even have a state in my HubSpot instance right now. So this is going to make it easier for me to change this now. Because I already have 14 records, I can't just change this. I have to copy their stuff. Oftentimes I create like a shell property where I move all that data to, and then I move it back. For sake of time, I'm just going to create a new one. But what I would generally recommend is clearing this property out and then transitioning it to the new one.
Cool out here on the ordering too is like do this step before you install AccountScout too, because AccountScout will start filling that property.
Exactly.
Or any data enrichment tool for a company will start filling that. Doing this with no data is much easier than if you do it after you imported that list from.
And I mean, I only have 14 records with a state, and it's still like more of a pain for me to do this. So in a perfect world, I would be just changing that default property, but for now I'm going to say US states specifically, and I'm going to make this contact information. I'm going to have this be a drop-down select. Yeah. And then I can load options, load presets, states from United States, load options, create. And the reason this is such a big deal, and I would do the same for country for the record too, is when you do reporting, I'm doing this for a client right now, and the reason we even prioritize this is we were trying to report on deals by state, and it was a mess. Some people had Pennsylvania as Pennsylvania, some had PA, some had just Penn. It was all over the place, and it made it pretty much impossible to actually report on the deals by state. So definitely check.
Inevitably, it's going to be in reporting, going to be looking for it, and you're going to wonder why they don't match what you would expect. It's probably going to be a data issue.
Yes. Then step 4 I have is customizing properties that actually matter. So we're already in properties. This is where I always say start simple. I think a lot of people get into a CRM, especially if they're moving from a different CRM, and they just create all the properties. But what happens when you do that is you create this like mess inside of HubSpot. Often it ends up being duplicate fields because people don't know where to find the data that you imported. I spoke just the other day just to have like a different industry field. So I definitely think just think about what properties are actually important to you right now and add those properties in for sure and make them easy to read and things like that. But don't add every single thing you can think of.
I think it's a good call out because there's the sort of two problems that come along with adding more properties, right? There's both, it's more maintenance overhead on the ops side of like, now I have all these things that I have to deduplicate or make sure I have values or make sure consistent in our reporting and like how we're using them. Mm-hmm. But I think that the bigger impact is that if nobody knows what each field does or why it's there, you end up with people sort of not trusting the data or the things they're being asked to fill out will actually be used or be useful ultimately. And so you start to hurt your adoption of the system overall.
Yeah. So for me, I'm going to create HubSpot Hubs as a property. I'm going to create this as a multi-checkbox. And we'll say marketing, sales, service, content. There's a million now. There's so many hubs.
Yeah, I can't believe you know all these by hub.
Well, I started getting stressed out that
I know you're going to offend some product teams at HubSpot.
And then so on from here. But here and the additional subscriptions that I have just top of mind all the time. But that's going to be this is an important one for me. May not be important to everyone, but just start thinking about what is actually important.
When thinking about that, do you have sort of a framework or a process that you go through to identify like these are the things that I should care about, I need as properties versus like I can just put this in a note or like other unstructured data? And then also you thinking through here's how I'm going to use that property or here's how I'm going to primarily populate that property, right? Like do you start thinking about the form or the CRM card or the playbook that you're going to run that will fill that property at the same time?
Yeah, I try to think about how I'm going to use the property exactly. So for me, the HubSpot subscription field is important because I know I have a form that I'm going to add that to and in the coming days. I'm launching a program, 30 minutes of HubSpot for 30 days. Once that program goes live, I'm going to have people include which products they're using to make sure that the content makes sense. So I start thinking about how I'm going to use that. There are a few ways to think about it. One is forms. What am I going to include on forms? The second one that I think is just as important is how am I going to segment people in HubSpot? What do I need for those lists? They may be the same thing as you're putting on forms, and often they probably will and should be, but sometimes they're not. And so that's the other thing I'm going to start thinking about in terms of what properties are important.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And it's great to have those sort of initial use cases for the data so you can start making sure that, your sort of assumptions about how you use it actually match the reality of what you do with it. Okay, so we've made it to 5.
So now we're going to import our data coming from a new CRM. I have people in my email that I need to add to HubSpot. I can do this manually, but I also can import it. I'm going to start an import file, start import. You can import multiple properties, multiple objects at once. I a lot of times like to do one object at a time. I find the mapping to be a little cleaner that way, but that's personal preference. And then I was very prepared and downloaded an example file. And I'm going to create an update because I have started to use contacts in HubSpot. And because this is an example file, it's kind of cleaner, but there is this property favorite foods. I can either create a new property for favorite foods. However, I'm not going to be segmenting people my favorite foods in my instance, so I'm probably not going to do that. The other thing that's really cool, and the import team, I bow down to the HubSpot import team. They have done so much in the last few years. It's insane when I think back to how it used to be. But in the importer now, you can like replace things. So I'm putting this in a drop-down field so I can map that to the right fields in HubSpot now, which is a lot better than it used to be. If I know coffee drinkers are marketers, I know shrimp people are operations, I can map those.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of nuance in these things, and yeah, the importer definitely makes it much easier and more obvious now how you'll translate the file that you're importing into what you have set up already in HubSpot.
On that state field example too, that's the one that I spend the most time in this tool with, because especially if you're at an event or something, people will mistype the state they live in, or they'll use the code versus the full name, whatever you're using. So this tool is really great for mapping that. And even there is auto fix errors, so HubSpot will try to fix it itself too.
Yeah, I love it. Awesome. Well, that rounds out the 5 things that you would do first from a data perspective in HubSpot. I think that gives folks some really good fundamentals around how to think about these things, even if these specific examples aren't exactly what you'll be implementing in your own portal. Certainly going through the step-by-step framework is going to be really helpful to get things right from the get-go. I know you showed a couple of resources as you're walking through things. I would love to know, where should people go to get those, to connect with you, check out the new 30 minutes of HubSpot for 30 days that you're running, which sounds really awesome. I know I, for one, am really interested in seeing what's in there. I think there's always things that you can be doing to sort of get better at how you're using HubSpot.
Going to my LinkedIn is probably the easiest. I am pretty active on LinkedIn, so definitely check that out. I have been posting about the sign up for the 30 days of HubSpot. You can also go to caseycohub.com/HubSpot in 30 interest. That's kind of a lot to type in though. So just go to my LinkedIn and look at the post.
You'll also link it directly in the description here. So
when you sign up, you'll get some resources. Once the program's live, you'll get some resources from me, including this checklist. I'll share this checklist on LinkedIn after this goes live too.
Amazing. Yeah, super excited for folks to sort of follow along through the steps and see how it improves the portals. But thanks so much for sharing this. I'm excited to continue this conversation around sort of the basic things, the fundamental things that you should be thinking about, especially if you're new to HubSpot portal or new to HubSpot overall. Thanks for this.
For having me.